Kia ora koutou. Now, 6 months ago, I was delighted to have the opportunity to interview a range of leading experts to discuss the inaugural BDO Wellbeing and Business Performance Index, Te Rangahau o ngā hauora pai. Now, this was New Zealand's first ever measure of the relationship between business performance and wellbeing. Now, with business and economic conditions changing rapidly at the moment, I'm excited to discuss with our panel today the next wave of results of this biannual report, including how New Zealand's business leaders are navigating these increasingly complex challenges and what they're doing to stay mentally healthy amidst all of this. Now, to help me explore this topic today, I'm pleased to be joined by Kimberly Simon, BDO Advisory Partner, Taranesh Singh, BDO Head of Risk Advisory, Michael Barnett, former Chief Executive of Auckland Chamber of Commerce and now founder of First Steps, a government-backed platform for wellbeing resources for business leaders. Kia ora, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Alrighty, Kim, I wanted to start off with you. Can you talk me through the WHO5 index, how it's changed since May, and how that plays into the Business Performance Index?
Yeah, so the WHO5 score is the World Health Organization measure to better understand wellbeing globally. So it's actually down 7 points to 62 out of 100, and we're seeing an increase in the number of business leaders being impacted by negative wellbeing. So inflation and other economic pressures, as Taranesh will go into shortly, are starting to have a real impact, with half of business leaders suffering from negative wellbeing is at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID's still the number one player in terms of understanding negative wellbeing in business leaders. However, we do see that coming back and being superseded by financial measures in the next 6 months. So financial measures and other issues and cash flow are second in terms of the factors creating negative wellbeing for businesses at 34%. But we're also seeing an increased workload. That's really that tight labour market coming through, with business owners really feeling like they need to do more of it themselves.
No, not great to hear that overall outlook has decreased, and clearly tough economic conditions are contributing to that, which has been highlighted in your latest NZ Risk Landscape report, Taranesh. Could you tell us a bit more about the current conditions?
Yeah, of course. What a year. It really has been up and down, and businesses are really getting pummeled from all directions at the moment. It's completely unsurprising that we've seen a decrease in that wellbeing score. By speaking to our clients, and also from the risk survey that we've recently undertaken, we've assessed it, and really there are 4 key groups of risks that exist at the moment and are coming into play for New Zealand businesses. The first, Kim's already touched on the point, it's an absolutely fundamental of just about every business and everyone I speak to at the moment, which is getting good people and retaining good people. We have a significant skill shortage. This is a global issue, and businesses are really struggling with it. And that's a key theme throughout the other 3 risk groupings that we have in play at the moment. The second is geopolitical tensions and political uncertainty, and of course the economic instability that comes off the back of that. We've got the war in Ukraine is an obvious one. You've also got the political and economic climate in China at the moment. And one example is countries like Japan, major manufacturing powerhouses, trying to understand what it's going to look like to go zero China at the moment. That will come with a significant cost, and that cost is ultimately going to be passed on to businesses and then consumers. Closer to home on the political front, we're probably a little bit more stable, luckily. However, we do have an election coming up next year, and that brings with it, that usual question of the 3-year cycle, and is it a little bit too short? Can we really get enough done in a 3-year term? Third grouping, supply chain. This is actually the core focus of our recent Global Risk Landscape report. Coming off the back of COVID, and then the turmoil that's followed, it's something that's affecting all businesses at the moment. It's coming from a number of facets, or there are a number of sub-factors that come into play. Port and disruption to travel and transport, Shutdowns, for example, in China, which is affecting factory output and then exports out of major trading partners. Fourth area, ESG. This is really a key issue that has cropped up reasonably rapidly, but it's a fundamental that's affecting almost all businesses at the moment. And again, it's multifaceted. You have consumers on one hand expecting and demanding more from the businesses that they purchase from or work with. They want to see meaningful action on ESG matters. And I should clarify here, I'm talking about environmental, social, and governance matters. You're also getting it from your people. Again, you touch on the war on talent. Employees want to know that the employers that they're working for have taken meaningful steps to improve and reduce their impact on the environment, and that they're socially socially equitable, and they're governing with best governance practices. And then, of course, you've got the physical risks that come along with climate change as well. You've got droughts and things like floods, which are affecting raw material availability and shortages. And all of these things combined are really, they're weighing down Kiwi businesses. We've done it really tough. And, without being too much of a doom and gloom merchant, I think that it will continue for a little while. So we need to batten down the hatches, but there are some solutions, and we'll touch on those a bit later.
It's really, there are so many factors at play, and it is this perfect storm. And I think a lot of people were prepared for the impact that COVID had. But do you think many businesses across the country were actually able to foresee the economic downturn after the fact? We've just dealt with this pandemic. Do you think that they were prepared for this?
To an extent. And look, the answer to that question does change from business to business. I think the key factor that's been surprising to business leaders and owners is the longevity of this pressure. A huge effort was put into the COVID response. And yes, I think business leaders understood that there'd be an impact and a financial and economic outcome, high inflation, interest rates increasing at a rapid rate. What I don't think people foresaw so well was how long this would last and endure, and just how unstable the post-lockdown world would be. We're almost 2023 now. COVID-19 was quite a while ago, or at least the start. But yeah, we're definitely still seeing very, very strong impacts as a result.
We don't want it as a COVID-23 or to keep extending beyond.
Don't put that out there, I don't think.
Now, I know you're talking about businesses being prepared. What is some of your advice for business leaders, business owners, to actually mitigate the risks of this and the ongoing impact that the economic downturn is having?
It's a great question. And look, there are steps that we can take. From the supply chain perspective, I think a lot of businesses have been doing a lot of these things already, because really from March 2020, we've had to take at least some, if not all of these measures. Dual sourcing, finding other ways of getting what you need to for your manufacturing process or your end products or services. Increasing transparency across the supply chain. I think this is something that's of critical importance, because it's not just understanding where you buy what you need to from, but it's also understanding where they get their materials and inputs from, and understanding the exposure across the supply chain as opposed to just your organization. It's not until you understand that and you've got that perspective, can you actually take some meaningful steps on it. Nearshoring or bringing manufacturing a little bit closer to home. And what we've seen, there's been a really big shift from supply chain efficiency, or away from supply chain efficiency, towards resilience. So again, that brings additional cost with it, but there are benefits in terms of certainty and availability of what you need when you need it. In terms of the political sphere, look, I think a lot of us might think that we could do it better. I'll leave that question unanswered, but the reality of the situation is that we don't, businesses don't have a very strong voice that is, certainly not able to influence government or make material changes quickly. But what we can do is we can affect and we can take actions on what our response is. And so to do that, I think we really need to make an assessment. What are our key risk factors for our organization? What measures do we already have in place to mitigate those issues? Our controls, our ways of working, our policies. And then undertake that gap analysis. Well, okay, where are we okay? Where are we a little bit exposed? And what actions can we then take to plug those gaps and build in a bit more resilience to the organization? And from the ESG perspective, a little bit the same. It's a really complex area, and there's a lot of things that come into play. But I think what businesses can do is quite a simple starting point is undertake a materiality assessment. And this doesn't need to be complex or difficult, but really it's about understanding what your business does. And then quickly after that, understanding what inputs and raw materials and other things go into doing what you do. And then figuring out what's most important to you as an organization. Now, this is not just the business owners and leaders, but the employees and also your wider stakeholders, especially your consumers. And understanding, well, what's important to these groups, and then what action can we take to make changes across the things that we do. That could be moving your energy to a more sustainable energy provider, or it could be reducing your carbon footprint by reducing travel across the workforce. There are ways, but it's not until you understand what you do and what you can impact until you can make a meaningful plan and take some actions to make those changes.
No, I definitely think you're right. I'm sure everyone has an opinion leading into election year next year, but we'll save that for later and we'll stick with the advice that you've just given us and some really sound advice there for business leaders as well. Now, speaking of well-being, congratulations on your semi-retirement, Michael. Definitely, hopefully contributing to your overall well-being. And a little bit of a pivot there, which I know is the word du jour at the moment. You've got a great resource, of course, that you've built for business well-being. Can you tell us a little bit more about First Steps?
So First Steps was put in place. It's a resource built by business for business, but it's a partnership with government. It's been in place since the beginning of this year, and it's a self-directed site. So you can go into the site and there's a huge amount of resource there associated with health, mental health and well-being. If I have a look at the site over the last 6 months, we've had over 80,000 visitors to the site. We've had nearly 90,000 resources downloaded. If I have a look at the conversations that are happening in there, the conversations from business are about burnout, they're about workload, and they're about pressures of living. If I then take a look and say, what are the top issues that business leaders are talking about at the moment? They're talking about stress and they're talking about anxiety. And if you have a look at what the responses are, the response to those two issues are firstly emotional outbursts, avoidance, and alcohol and drugs. So I think it's a good thing that we know and we can tell the signs, and individually, if we know what the signs are, we know that we can react. I think one of the big things for me is the people that are using the site are the people with need. What I'd like to be able to do is say to people, before you have a need, this should be a part of your life. This should be a part of the behaviours you develop so you don't get to a point where there's pressure, where there's stress, and where there's pressure on your life and the way that you're living it.
Mm-hmm. We've obviously heard the statistics and we're hearing it in this business performance index. You're seeing it at the coalface. Is this a surprise to you, or were you actually expecting this to roll out after the pandemic or on the tail end?
No, I think there was a conversation that was happening before, but it was a conversation. I think the things that our speakers have talked about, that's what's made it worse in the marketplace. So if you have a look at the pressures on business today, some of them are financial, and it's going to be about interest rates, and it's going to be about mortgages, and it's going to be about access to money. It's going to be about access to staff and the shortages and the inability for businesses at the moment. So you've got a whole lot of new pressures that have come through there, and those new pressures are making the issue of mental health and well-being, it's making it worse. And I think for the government to have a response, and for us as business organisations and leaders to be encouraging people to have the conversation and take the steps to mitigate the mental health issues that are out there. I think it's a great thing.
No, definitely, and great to catch it early as well, like you say, and it's obviously great to get direction from a boss, but when you're your own boss, how do you actually prioritise that? Because I know there are so many business pressures and stresses. How do you make mental well-being a top priority and factoring that into your day-to-day?
So I think for most of it, it's a case of having that conversation. So I think a part of our value statement, and so many corporates today in particular will talk about their value statements. And I think it's probably time many of us started talking about our behaviours. And so it's the behaviours when you're in front of the audience, and it's also how you behave when you're by yourself. And that's important. If you have a look at some of the real essentials, it's going to be about breathing, it's going to be about eating, and it's going to be about exercising. And you can't compromise on any of those. Doesn't matter if you're an employee at the lowest level or a boss. Those are the things that matter. So an example would be, if you're working long hours and you're grabbing snacks and you're grabbing fast food, there's a cost to that. And the cost's going to be in your health, it's going to be in your well-being. And if we know that, then we know how to respond. And it's the same thing around exercise. It's important to exercise. It's important that we're getting good sleep. And if we're not getting any of those things, you can come to the First Step site and there's some great resources there that are going to help. But these are conversations we should be having in our teams. We should be having them from the top all the way through of our organisations to make sure that we've got a response there for the people as they come under pressure, if they come under pressure.
It's such a complex issue, and it's amazing to think it's something as simple as your nutrition, your ability to exercise, taking that time to actually have a bit of a breather. It's amazing to think that it's such a simple solution, or can be a simple solution. What do you say to people who go, I just don't have time. I don't have time to go to the gym. I don't have time to go for a walk. How important is it to actually make that and put that at the forefront of your mind?
And I think a big part for people today is that they have a plan. I think, one of the things that when people are saying they don't have time, one of the problems with people is that we like to be liked, right? And because we like to be liked, we say yes when people ask us to do things. We have to learn to say no. And if we're going to be saying yes, we need to make sure we've got good teams around us that we can delegate to. Right? So there's a choice in there, and we need to be able to think about exercise. I don't have time for exercise. We'll start off walking a short distance this week and extend it and extend it and extend it. Don't look to do things quickly. Make changes in your life and in your behaviours and make them slowly. We all have time. It's a matter of prioritising, and to me, your life and who you are and what you stand for is important.
Having those healthy boundaries, it's something I'm still learning myself, and no doubt a lot of other people are. You touched briefly on the resources available through your organisation. What are some of the specific resources that people can tap into?
Listen, some of the resources are interviews, and that interviews with top chief executives in New Zealand. Look, I'm going to name a couple. Greg Foran from Air New Zealand. Totally self-effacing and humanises this whole thing of who I am and how I should live and how I should have people around me. Some of those resources are great. Mike Bennett's from Z Energy talks about the importance of me, the importance of me as an individual, and there's some great words from him. But there's also, if I have a look at one of the top issues that people come to us and talk to us about, it's about sleep. And if you have a look at the greatest recovery agent for us is sleep. What it does to the body and the preparation for the next day is important. So getting a good night's sleep, and there's some great resources around sleep there. So I think, from the little voice in your head and how to deal with it through to insomnia, or just knowing how some of our leading chief executives are dealing with mental health and well-being, is important, and you'll find it on the site.
And quick pop quiz, how many hours a night do you get now that you're semi-retired?
6.5.
6.5. Tara Nesh, how about you?
About the same.
6.5, Kim?
Yeah, about the same.
I feel like that's about the average. Is it a relatively good benchmark, Michael, or does it vary from person to person?
It's the quality of the sleep. And I think one of the good things about the site, you can go in there and they'll give you some tips on what to do as you prepare for sleep each night, and the things that you should be doing with your phone and the things you shouldn't be doing with coffee and alcohol. There's some great tips there, well worth a visit.
I can imagine, yeah, the phone is definitely the big issue for me, and I'm sure it's the same for all of you sitting here on this couch. Now, before I turn back to you, Kim, I wanted to ask Michael, you've semi-retired now, you've gone into this. Why have you started up this organisation? You've clearly highlighted just how important wellbeing is.
I think one of the sad things for New Zealand is that, the large number of people that are dealing with depression. And I think when, you have a look at that and you see the things in life that take people through to having a mental health problem. And the things are the things that I talked about before, and they are pressures of life. They are our workloads. And there's nothing wrong with having ambition and, looking to achieve. But having balance in your life is important. Having your life and your well-being, the cost of your success, is not a great decision.
No, completely agree. Kim, I wanted to talk to you as well, because in the BDO Wellbeing Index, there are a few business owners who are asked about how they're managing their wellbeing and what they're doing to manage that. Can you tell me a little bit about some of those first-hand experiences and what people are doing?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that's really coming through is flexibility, which is fantastic to see so many business leaders out there using flexibility to help manage those boundaries and maintain that work-life balance that Michael's talking about. And it's also a really effective tool in terms of staff engagement. So if business owners are using it for themselves to manage that work-life balance, but actually using it as a tool to bring staff in the door and make their workplaces just that wee bit more attractive. But speaking of workload, another really effective tool that business owners are using, but at the moment it's only 17% of business owners, is outsourcing. Taking those key functions like their finance, like their HR or their IT, and outsourcing them to other organisations rather than trying to go it alone. They're really useful things that don't have to cost a lot of money that business leaders can use to then focus on their own businesses and their own expertise, rather than trying to do it all themselves.
Mm-hmm. Has there been anything in your own work life as well that you've found really works for managing your own mental well-being?
For me, it really is that flexibility. A couple of young kids trying to work full time. It's trying to manage everything and get that sleep in there as well. I'm not sure when I have time to exercise, but it's trying to essentially do everything and be good at everything. And making sure I actually say no to a few things, as you said. I think that's absolutely accurate.
Yeah, those healthy boundaries I think are so important, but good to hear that you're getting your 6.5 hours. It seems like a good benchmark.
Yeah. 8's a long way.
Maybe when you're on holiday.
Yeah,
now, workload was also a key issue for businesses in the survey, but so was financials. You work with businesses on their financials all the time. What have you found is working well for clients to manage the challenges that we've seen in the survey?
Yeah, so that strong financial management and behind the scenes is really helping some of the businesses I'm working with manage the impacts of inflation and other increases in costs. So we're actually only seeing about a third of businesses thinking they are using strong financial management processes and behind the scenes to do this, which is quite concerning given the number of business leaders that are saying it's such an issue. So with my clients, it's really around that forecasting in terms of the financials, but also those non-financial things like stock and making sure they've got enough to sell. So budgeting, forecasting, it can't just be done on an annual basis anymore. I think pre-COVID, we had that position that business leaders would sit down and they would plan their year, and this is what it would look like and this is how much they would make. But economic conditions are just changing so fast that they really need to be onto it more frequently than that. The other really key thing is making friends with your banker. You need to be able to plug in and get that help when it's needed. So planning ahead, understanding where the holes, the gaps in your cash flow are, and having that banker that you can call and say, look, I need to access a facility or access trade finance to see you through. And a key part of that is having up-to-date financials, having forecasts that are stress tested and that are being prepared by your advisor. The other key thing that was touched on was delegating and seeking that support when you need it. So most business leaders will have an advisor, but they need to ring them when they have an issue or before they have an issue. Call and talk to them about their businesses. A number of business leaders use advisory boards for that same kind of purpose. So an advisory board, similar to a board of directors, but they have no actual decision-making power in their business. So it's really a gathering of all of those key advisors and a meeting of the minds on business leaders and assisting them to make decisions.
Some fantastic insights there. Now, I know that you said it's quite hard to look into the future. Not all of us have the crystal ball that I think a lot of businesses would hope that they could have access to. In the survey, of course, the businesses involved were asked about performance in the future as well. Looking ahead, and again, I know it's hard to look ahead, what are business leaders expecting to see, at least in the short term, if we can't predict long term?
Yeah, I think, look, we've talked quite a bit of doom and gloom here this morning, but Kiwi business leaders are actually pretty positive about the future, with 72% being actually really positive about how they will feel, how their wellbeing will go long term. So again, COVID-19 is going to start dropping back. We'll actually move to third in terms of the key causes of negative wellbeing. Whereas business leaders at the moment, they're looking into the future and seeing those financials as being the key cause to their negative wellbeing, closely followed by those political and economic conditions.
Do you think that sort of, I guess, mainly positive outlook is the fact that the pandemic is sort of starting to fall by the wayside? I know that there are new challenges that are presenting themselves, but I think we're getting used to this new normal now, the normal that existed before 2020.
Yeah, I do think, look, it's been a hard nearly 3 years, and business leaders are learning to cope with the struggles. I mean, we've seen that with supply chain specifically, where that, I know in the last survey, that was one of the key reasons for negative wellbeing, was people worrying about their supply chain, but now it's more cash flow, because I think they've dealt with supply chain by using their cash, and so they're just kind of passing problems from one to the next. But looking forward, it looks like in 6 months' time, people are feeling positive.
Well, it's been great hearing all of your insights today, but before we wrap up, I wanted to ask, what's the one thing that you think businesses should focus on over the next 6 months? Taranesh, I might start with you.
Look, it's quite simple. We've talked about a lot of risks, of challenges, of issues that businesses are facing right now. Just remember that every risk also presents an opportunity. So take action, make a plan, and if you focus on that and deliver, there's a lot of upside that'll follow as well.
Glass half full kind of attitude. I like to hear it, and I'm sure lots of businesses will agree. Michael, how about you?
I think we're so used to walking up to one another and saying, "How are you?" What we need to do is to stop and look at ourselves and ask, "How are you?" Because I think the answer to that's going to make sure that we're going to be in the best condition that we can to be in business, to have relationships, and to work with family.
Great advice. And Kim, how about you?
Prioritise understanding your financials and looking forward, seeing where those gaps are and what you can do now to help get through them. Yeah.
Some fantastic advice to end it all off with. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Kimberly Simon, Taranesh Singh and Michael Barnett. And thank you so much for watching. For more on the BDO Wellbeing and Business Performance Index, you can visit bdo.nz/wellbeing, where you'll find more tips to help with your business finances. And for further support, on screen now are some key resources for you to reach out to. Ngā mihi, haere rā, take care and look after yourselves.